We'll go ahead and start recording. Um, Welcome, everybody. Uh, Today is our first class session that's a little bit different for me because I've never done online teaching. And last semester, because we had to just sort of jump into online teaching, basically what I did was for the entirety of the 3 hours, I did the lectures. And just basically spoke up to a wall of people. You know, we had basically 3 weeks to shift our entire class to online, and that sort of made things a little bit difficult. But this semester, over the summer, I had a chance to really go through and see what works, see what I think works for this class, and so that's what we're going to be doing today. So what I'm going to be doing here is going through sort of a overview of the lecture that we just went through. If you have any questions about it, if you really want to dig in deeper to this, you can. And I also have like some questions for you guys, and then some more deep dives into some of the more uh, um, the more salacious bits, or the more interesting type bits that I think. And if you guys, as you go through your reading, if there's something that you really want to dive into while you're doing your reading, if you're like, oh, this is really interesting, can we discuss this in class? Just send me an email and I'll put a little um, PowerPoint slide in there, and we can go ahead and have the whole class discuss um, any of these issues, that any of these things that you think is really neat. So we can do that. Or if during the course of the class today that you really want to discuss something, just put your raised hand icon, or an emoji there, and I'll go ahead and call on you. We can talk it that way. So what I wanted to do first today was to actually kind of set up this first um, this first there you go, this first section here that we're going to be looking at. The next few weeks we're going to be looking at the world basically from around 1300 to 1500, and then we'll get a little bit further on into it. Like today's class, there's a section at the end where we basically go from like 1600 to 1648, just to sort of set things up later on. One of the things about this course is, because it is a world history course, that we have to be we have to sort of jump around from place to place. We can't really be sort of stuck in a chronological order. If we went chronologically, we would basically every year in the world history events, we'd be moving from a different continent to a different continent, things like that. So the way that we're going to be doing things is looking at this segmentedly, and we're going to be doing that throughout the semester up until about the colonization of Africa and things like that. And that's when everything sort of melds together with European dominance and the rise of the United States of America. So really, we're going to be looking, especially here, the first couple of modules, we'll be looking at the world in different segments, and timelines are going to sort of cross over and things are going to change. So I kind of want to show you exactly some of where we are here in this first section. So what we will do is look at Europe in the 1300s. In our book and in the first lecture, we really began around the 1300s. We're looking at the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. So this is what Europe looked like in the 14th century. You have the beginnings of the world that we know. The world of the 20th century really begins to start to take shape around here. You have the rise of a strong England that is moving into Ireland, controlling Ireland, and really has a small hold on the continent as well. You also have a France that is beginning to, or a Frankish empire that is beginning to expand out and really butt up against this English empire. At the same time, you have Spain, which is beginning to take shape as the different crowns of Navarra, Aragon, and Castile are pushing out the last bits of the Sultanate of Granada. Here, this purple part here down at the bottom is actually a sultanate that is sort of the last remnants of the Islamic Empire that at one point controlled almost the entirety of the Iberian Peninsula. So you're seeing this this new world begin to take shape. You have the remnants of the old world with the Holy Roman Empire, which, as I will say throughout, is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, and it is the last sort of gasp of the old the old Roman extent into the Germanic lands. And so here you are, like I said, you're starting to see the world that we know take shape. Meanwhile, in what was a very strong Byzantine and very strong Islamic empire, you're seeing this breakdown here. This is in the 1300s. This is all that's left of the Byzantine Empire, basically Constantinople and the lands around it. The once proud Byzantine Empire with Constantinople as the second Rome is basically a place the size of parts of Arizona. So it is very, very small. It is shrunken down, and you actually have all of these different Islamic tribal Islamic not really sultanates, that they're more like, they're basically warlords here. You have the beginnings here with Osman, which we'll go over next time, of the beginnings of the Ottoman Empire. So here you see the beginning of the Ottoman Empire in the 1300s. And then in Asia, in the 1300s, you still have the Khans. The Khanates are still strong, but you're starting to see these Khanates begin to settle down and ingratiate themselves with the people that they've controlled. There's only so much hunting, there's so much killing, pillaging, raping that you can do before it becomes unsustainable and you actually have to build something. And so you're seeing empires build up with the empire of Kublai Khan that we'll look at in a couple of weeks, that is beginning to turn more and more Chinese. The Golden Horde Empire is beginning to have trade relations with the Russian Kiev states. The Ilkhan Empire is beginning to adopt Islam. And so you have the old Khanates begin to break down. And so whenever we come back, we're going to go through this, and then when we come back here's Europe by 1500, by the time of exploration. England is no longer a part of France. Spain has come together. The Holy Roman Empire has begun to split up. And you see the Ottoman Empire is breaking into Europe. So if you look at the way it was of all of these smaller kingdoms, you're starting to see much more consolidation. The stronger rulers are taking what they feel is their rightful claim. In the Muslim world, you see by 1500, you're going to see the Ottoman Empire basically begin to take its march into North Africa, into the Middle East, and towards Asia, as I said. And the Ilkhanate Empire is going to become the Safavid Empire, a very strong Muslim empire. And that's what we'll be going over next week. And then the week after that, we'll look at Asia with the Ming Dynasty overthrowing the Khanates. We'll see the Mongol Empire begin to break down as ethnic Mongols and ethnic Rus begin to intermix, and you start seeing the rise of Russian power over Mongol power, and the rise of, like I said, the Safavids and the Sultanate of Delhi begin to break down as the Mughal Empire rises up. So here is these great khanates in the 1300s. By the 1500s, everything sort of begins to break down. Is anybody going over the readings and some of the lectures? Does anyone have any big picture questions? Does anyone have anything like large and looming? Any sort of what direction are we going? What are we going to be doing this semester? Any type of questions like that?
One of the things that I wasn't aware of before I started doing the readings was that Portugal was essentially on the forefront of exploration into the New World, and how that came about. How that country beat out England, beat out France, beat out pretty much everybody else in those conquerings, and then ended up losing out as time went by.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that we're really going to dig into is how shipbuilding and trading is one of the keys in this early modern period for success. Now, in order to have sustained success, you have to have a large resource base, and that's one of the things that Portugal was never able to do, which is why they ended up falling down in importance behind Spain, England, and even the Dutch, the hated Dutch. And we'll get into why the Dutch are so hated even in the coming weeks. So any other observations, any questions, any sort of big picture ideas? Good. Then we will go ahead. Oh, sorry. I forgot one thing. Like I said, this is so. Okay. So looking at this, we have Asia in 1500, Asia in the 1300s, Europe in the 1500s, 1300s, etc., the Balkans and the Muslim empires. Is there anything that we're missing? Does anybody see anything missing?
The Americas?
That is correct. The Americas. There's this whole world out there that we are missing a lot of. A lot of that has to do with what's going to be coming up ahead. A lot of that has to do with the way that conquest plays out. You know, we have so much history that we looked at that we can still see in Europe, but when it comes to the Americas, there's so much that has been lost. And as we go through these next few weeks, and as we look at conquest, as we look at the way that the world shapes up, what I would ask everyone to do is to kind of keep in mind that this is only part of the history. There is a huge chunk that is missing because of the way that conquest took place, and we'll be talking more and elaborating more on that as we go along. But know that, you know, at the time that, you know, the Renaissance is happening, that the Middle Ages, Golden Age of Islam, there's a lot going on in the Americas that just has been lost, that we don't really know, that we are just now being able to find. You know, it's really important to us here in the Southwest, especially to take note of all of these things and really keep that in mind as we look at world history, to know that really there is a missing section of world history that, you know, we really still to this day don't really know a lot of. So just wanted to add that in for. So that is that. Yeah. go. So, um, today we are going to be talking about the Renaissance and the Reformation. We're going to be looking at the ways that the European world changes and the ways that Europe begins to expand and begins to move out from the ways that that had been before. So the question I have for any of you here is, what do you know about the Renaissance? Anyone's free to chime in before I start picking on people.
It was, for me, my biggest thing before really getting into the class was the expansion of the arts. Michelangelo, Galileo, Da Vinci, and their impact on art and that world.
And that's one of the biggest things that people think about is Renaissance painting. But know that people like Michelangelo he wasn't just an artist; he was also an inventor, an engineer. He basically, without being able to actually complete it, he invented the helicopter. And at one point, he fashioned himself a set of wings because he felt that if he just made some giant wings and jumped off a building, he could figure out how to fly. It never really happened. Yes. Sorry. There you go. Let's see. Mr. Kokler. Yes.
Yeah. My computer froze up and it just said it was unstable and everything froze. I couldn't hear anything for a few seconds.
Okay. Sorry, I just saw a look of concern on your face. I was like, oh, did I skip something? Okay. Yes. No, it's going to happen, but thank you. So yeah, like I said, it's, there are these, as I said in the lecture, there's this well-rounded individual in the Renaissance man, the person that is looking and is really being much more than just a painter, more than just a writer. It is someone that can do a lot of things. So what else? What else do you know about the Renaissance? It could be anything. Yes, Liam.
It was also well known for being in the North, like in English ways, because you had like Sir Thomas, William Shakespeare, especially for like writing and stuff like that. So it was in a kind of evolution of writing and how that went about.
That's right. The Northern Renaissance is sort of looked at separately sometimes from the Mediterranean Renaissance because, as I said in the lecture, this is a long continuum of movement of ideas, and one of the things that we look at is that in the South, in the Mediterranean, there was a lot more emphasis on art and philosophy, and that trickled up towards the North. By the time it got to the North, they had these, they were doing things their own way, but some of the things that they really picked on was writings and figuring out how to interpret writings, how to improve on writings, and people like Shakespeare and his contemporaries were really big into lifting the written word, and we'll get more into that. Anything else that you know about the Renaissance? Yes, Jackie. Oh, let me unmute you.
Okay, wasn't it like because the word Renaissance wasn't from French for rebirth or something, and that it was like kind of from there start building that everything started like, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry, but I remember that.
Yeah, well, there has to if it's a rebirth, a Renaissance, then that means you had to have a death. And the Renaissance is not a name that they actually gave to themselves at the time period. No one was like, I really love living in the Renaissance. This is great. The Renaissance is a term that really was given to them in the centuries later, when historians started looking back and were like, oh, look how terrible things were. Then all of a sudden things are great. So the Renaissance is this rebirth, and that's why the Middle Ages get such a bad rap, because of how good things were in the Renaissance, that everything that came before it was just terrible, or or so historians said. So anything else? When I say the word Renaissance, what comes to mind?
The rise of Protestantism and Lutheranism overtaking the Catholic Church.
That's right, I think. And all right, usually I get at least one person that says this, but does anybody ever go out to Apache Junction around February through April and hit up the Renaissance Fair? Does anybody do that? Go ahead and put an emoji, raise your hand. There you go, Nathaniel, Brian. Yeah, Joseph, Tara, exactly. When I say Renaissance, a lot of the times people look at Renaissance fairs and think that that's what it is. So I'll go ahead and pick on Tara. What do you see when you go to this Renaissance fair? Let me unmute you, or ask you to unmute. Yeah.
Okay, we see jesters, we see the unicorn, and the mermaids. I go with my kids. The dragon slide is our favorite. But we always see the king walking around. Yeah.
And how does everybody speak there?
Very royally.
ye old English, right?
And the other thing I think of when I think of the Renaissance are like bugs, fleas, ticks, lice. That's another thing that comes to mind when I think of Renaissance. So,
yes, they weren't the cleanest, even up into the 17th century.
but weren't they like plagued with that then, with like fleas and ticks and stuff?
Yes, one of the things that they really felt, and we'll discuss this as we go on, is that if you bathed too much, you got rid of a protective layer of dirt that was there to sort of keep bad things away.
Huh.
So you had to have a nice little layer of dirt, and sometimes that layer of dirt came with lice and other assorted bugs on you. Yeah.
Gross.
Yes, very much so. But it was all about keeping yourself in balance. So yeah, so that's a fun thing about talking about the Renaissance is as was noted that the Northern Renaissance is sort of pushed forward. The English Renaissance is pushed forward above everything else, and so this idea of ye old times, of medieval times, also all this idea sort of becomes glutted together. So one of those things, if I could travel anywhere in time, I would like to go a couple hundred years in the future and see what they think about of the 20th century, what sort of things that they put together. Maybe it'll be some sort of like weird steampunk thing that they've created that basically melds all the 20th century. But that's history for you. Everything you pick and choose the good parts of history, and in picking and choosing the good parts of history, sometimes then you sort of are able to also push up the bad things of history. And that's what happens when we talk about the Dark Ages. We discussed in the lecture, I discuss of a lot of the misconceptions of the Renaissance, and the main one is this misconception of the Dark Ages as completely backwards. So what happened in the Middle Ages? what exactly was there in the Middle Ages that that um, gives it such a bad rap? I'll go ahead and pick on Harry. Oh, Joseph, I see your hand up. Let me unmute you or ask you to unmute.
The end had the Black Plague.
Yes, the Black Plague. Thank you, Harry. Now, Joseph. Now you go.
Even sorcery.
But believe in sorcery. But
Yes.
believe in sorceress. Believe in sorcery.
There was a huge belief in superstition. There was a belief in the spirits that would come and take and come after you.
Carlos, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if anybody else isn't.
Oh. How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. Got it. Okay. I think I accidentally. All right. Anyway, Jack, you had something?
Yeah, didn't the church have like pretty much absolute power and kind of run the show and basically like stopped all like scientific advancement that went against the church?
Yes, that's one of the things that most people say, that they stopped all scientific advancements, but they really didn't stop all scientific advancements. They just sort of stopped anything that would go against church teachings. They tried to make sure that any sort of new advancements in technology, in astrology, kept this idea that the world revolved, or that the universe revolved around the Earth. That the Earth was the center of the universe, because God created this world, and that means that this is the center of all creation.
Yeah, it was Copernicus, right, that said that.
So let's see. Anybody else? So you have the plague, you have this belief in sorcery, you have the church completely controlling most facets of society, almost completely controlling all facets of society. Anything else? Yes. Oops, sorry, I accidentally muted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Kind of just with the church controlling everything, but more, somebody said it with violence, about how if anybody just didn't blindly follow the church, there were more violent wars, and the punishments were just more violent and intense itself if you just didn't believe it in general. So just probably more wars involving the church.
And what's the big wars involving the church during the Middle Ages?
I'm really drawing a blank, but I know there's one like of the Knights of the Templar.
Yeah. Yep, Brian, like you got it?
Crusades.
The Crusades.
Crusades.
That's correct. Yes. The Crusades are this big war of religion. And one thing to note, it is, Christianity pushing forward against non-Christians. So war has this sort of idea that, if the Pope says jump, you have to jump. If he says I need 500 knights, you have to send it. The Pope is telling you what to do. So you have war, church, church control, Black Death, this lack of technology for the normal people. Anything else from the Middle Ages? It goes along with superstition. What would you call, if you were in the Middle Ages, a woman that lived by herself, that didn't care about anyone else? Yes, Jackie.
Wasn't it the witch, like the hunting of the witch, like the witch hunting?
Yeah, actually witch hunting. Witch hunting goes along with superstition and with the church. basically, there was this idea that evil spirits were out there, could be controlled, and so they would hunt down witches. Witches weren't regularly burned at the stake. They were, that was sort of a good waste of a lot of wood. But so usually people that were executed were done so by hanging, which is a lot easier and a lot cheaper. So that's the big thing that people know of is Black Death and the witch trials, and know that the witch trials continue into the 1600s in the New World. As you move forward, we'll discuss those a bit more as we go along, but know that this idea of the unknown is something that really continues to scare people and continues to impact people's lives. Even to this very day, people are still pretty much frightened of anything that they don't understand. So that is what most people think of when they think of the Middle Ages, is all of these different bad things, and you really sort of don't see that there's some good things that happen in the medieval period, that it's not all bad. This over here on my on the left side of the screen is one of my favorite paintings here. There was art happening in the Middle Ages. There was a lot of the art was done in monasteries. A lot was done in universities. A lot of art was done in the margins of books, because a lot of the importance was writing down books by hand. And if anyone has ever been in trouble, or if anyone has ever had to basically do things like copy the encyclopedia, or do some sort of menial task like that, exactly how boring it could be. Or if you have to basically write down notes in the middle of a meeting, and you just kind of like just repeating everything down, it can get a bit boring. And so a lot of art in the Middle Ages is done sort of to make things look pretty. It livens the page. So you see a lot of different these different drawings on the sides of handwritten books. This is one of my favorite, because it looks like this guy here is telling these people to leave Jesus alone, and he's using a club to do so. I don't know. I've never really looked into this, but I just love it. It looks like he's Jesus's private security, and he's really keeping people at bay. It's like, no, don't put, no touchy. And so you did have a lot of art. You did have sculpture. You did have all this sort of thing. You also had literature. If we're talking about the Northern Renaissance, you also have to talk about Northern European literature at the time. Things like the Canterbury Tales. By a showing of hands, how many people have ever read the Canterbury Tales or know of the Canterbury Tales? Well, there's at least one person. Usually, this sort of thing has fallen out of. There you go. Sorry if you've been putting up things on the chat. It got hidden behind my PowerPoint, so I just had to go grab it. Yes. So I'll start looking at that more. So the Canterbury Tales, Daniel says he's seen it in the senior year. So it's basically a collection of stories of pilgrims going to holy sites. Usually the town of Canterbury, which is where the bishop was of England, and people would do pilgrimages there. And Geoffrey Chaucer, a very English name there, Geoffrey Chaucer, kind of shows how intermixed England and France was. Chaucer would basically write down stories that he heard. So he would collect people's stories and write them down. People that had very fun or very nice stories. Apparently he collected hundreds of them, but only a few survive throughout the centuries. I think there's like 30 something of these stories that survive, but the stories are basically, some of them are very funny, humorous stories. Some of them are very bawdy. A lot of mix up of who's married to who or who's in bed with who, things like that. So you don't really think about these sort of things in the Middle Ages, but people love good, crass humor. Yes, Brian.
Whoever's seen A Knight's Tale,
Yeah.
he was one of the characters in that.
Yes. A Knight's Tale. Heath Ledger was the star of that one. So if you ever seen that movie, Geoffrey Chaucer I think he was like his buddy. Yes, Nathaniel, you've seen it. So Geoffrey Chaucer would just like write down stories that he heard and keep them. So there's some stories that basically are parables that tell a tale about give life lessons, and there are some that are just like, oh, this person fell down and soiled his pants. Isn't that funny? Ha 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 ha. So never underestimate how universal potty humor is. When it comes down to it, a good fart joke will kill at any event, no matter how formal. Just know that goes back way back to the Middle Ages and probably before that. So you had art, you had literature, and you also had medicine. As I was talking about earlier, that the different there was sort of this idea that you couldn't get too clean because that would rub things off. That's because they were still operating on centuries old medicine and folk medicine that basically said that the human beings had four humors, or four different elements within them that needed to be in place: blood, mucus, black bile, and yellow bile. All of those things needed to be in perfect order in order for you to be healthy. So, for example, if you might have a headache or you might be feeling sick, that's because you have too much blood in you. So let's take you to the doctor, who was also a barber, because they had knives, and he'll cut you open a little and bleed you out, or bring some leeches and put it on you to suck some blood out, just to fix it. Let's say that you're all stuffed up. Well, here's some roots that'll make you throw up to get rid of some of that yellow bile. Make you healthier that way. And so it was all about keeping people in balance. That made it so that people really weren't as conscious about cleanliness and things like that. And even as you look at some of the writings of sailors as they're going into the Americas, in the Americas, they had running water, they had cleanliness. The natives throughout the Americas understood cleanliness a bit more than the Europeans, and the Europeans would recoil at at how often people bathed. They would say, oh, they bathe themselves daily. They rub oils in their hair that makes it smell like fruits. It's terrible. Get me out of here. Get me back to the nice dirt-smelling places of home. So there was this idea that there was dirt was sort of a necessity, that there was things that needed to be in balance. And then as we're going through the later Middle Ages, you start seeing that doctors begin to say, well, there's a reason why people get sick. that something, it's not just internal. The external world has an effect on you, because people that are living away from the cities don't seem to be getting as sick as often as people that live in the crowded cities do. And so they begin to figure out that there are such things as germs, that there are such things as infections that can get you sick. And as trade routes open up after the Crusades, a lot of these doctors start getting Islamic medicine books, Indian medicine books, civilizations that have figured all this stuff out centuries beforehand, and these books begin to be translated into Greek, and then from Greek into Latin. And so you start seeing the expansion of medicine, and that's going to be part of this renaissance as you start rediscovering this rebirth of things such as medicine, as all of a sudden Europe is just as is starting to catch up to the rest of the world, the way that they understood health and understood medicine. But there was medicine in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just grinding herbs and seeing what stuck. There was some sort of learning. Any questions on the Middle Age, on some of this good stuff before we get into the next part? So, speaking of health and disease, the Black Death. The Black Death was one of the worst events in European history. What happens is in the 1300s, early 1300s, you have this mass famine that goes throughout Europe. You have a few years where the climate changes, and you actually see a lot of hotter weather in the fall and winter that allows more bugs to survive, and so crops are eaten up. You have hotter summers that basically dry up the riverbeds, and there's not as much irrigation water for crops, and so you actually have blight and famine that hits the people of Europe. And so what happens whenever you don't eat well? What happens whenever you aren't getting as much nutrition?
You become ill.
It's not that you become ill, is that your immune system weakens. Yeah. You get sick because you're weak. And so all of a sudden here comes this disease coming through. This disease that comes through actually comes through from the Mongols. The Mongols bring it through. They bring it through their second wave. The first wave of Mongols are just there to not even conquer, just to kill, ravage, to pillage, and take what they can. And then as the Mongols begin to see that there's money to be had, they begin to open up trade routes. They begin to take trade ships throughout their cities. And so it is on these trade ships that you have rats. And the rats have fleas. And inside the fleas is a microbe, Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis comes in and hits Europe in three different steps. The first one is through the bubonic, and then septimic, and then finally pneumonic. So the bubonic plague is spread through contact with someone that is that has it, and this is the first, you might have black boils, or you might have an infection on your skin, but because of how you really didn't keep yourself too clean, it was just another one, and you would, be in contact with other people, and then all of a sudden you start bleeding from these. You start getting some of your, your blood turns black, and you start bleeding from your pores. That's why they called it the Black Death, is because the blood that would come out of you was black. And so this is the first step. And so as people are dying from this, their bodies are just tossed into the rivers. Their bodies are just tossed into great mass graves, and these mass graves get into the groundwater. And here's where the second one, the septemic, gets you. And so you begin to get sick from the inside. And once again, you just start bleeding through your pores, and people just begin to drop like flies, especially in the cities. The more concentrated the water source, the more concentrated the food source, the worse it is for people. So you begin to congregate, and you begin to see more and more people dying. And then the third wave hits. The third wave is where the spores are released from the dead bodies, and it becomes airborne. And this is where you see people like the plague doctors. Has anybody seen this guy walking around? Hopefully you haven't seen him walking around campus, or you haven't seen him walking around your cities, but does anybody know what the significance of a plague doctor is?
Wouldn't it be the doctors wore the masks and the beak was so long because, again, I think I read that they had something that would protect them under their nose, and that's how they were able to come to your house or help other people, because the mask kept it inside in their face. And also, what was the third plague called again, or the third part?
Pneumonic, like pneumonia.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Elijah said, he would come to your house. They would come over, and yeah, they had these. So I don't know if anybody has ever, been around rotted meat or anything like that. Raise your hand if you've ever done that. I went out of town one day while I was in undergrad, and the electricity, my roommate had forgotten to pay the electric bill, so we went out camping and came back, and all the meat in our refrigerator had spoiled. And when you just opened the door, that wave hit you. And so these plague doctors were walking through cities like this. And so what they would do is they would put things like, they would put these bags that had like lavender, mint, things that would smell good. But there were these mesh bags that acted as filters. So they actually were using filters. And through these filters, the pneumonic plague really couldn't get into them. So they accidentally stumbled upon this way of working. So wearing these gloves, wearing everything, so you didn't touch anybody, so you didn't accidentally inhale some of these dead bodies. The plague doctors would come around. Many of them would actually die because the odor would get into there. But if you're wearing mask and a giant robe, no one knows what you look like. So when you die, you're just another dead body, So, and then somebody else, a different plague doctor comes in. So they were thought to be immortal. So they were actually these people that were seen as being good luck charms. Sometimes you wanted them to come after the plague started. You didn't want them to come before there was a plague outbreak. If everybody was looking healthy, things are going great, and you see a plague doctor coming around town, That's when it's bad. So these plague doctors would be this this sort of litmus test. When they're there afterwards, you know, and you've survived, it's a good thing. If he's there before people are getting sick, then you know trouble's along the way. And so, much like in this current plague that we have, it does get airborne, and it is shown. It is spread from person to person. And so, what are the places that are going to be affected the most? Emma, what do you think? What do you think are places that are affected the most by an airborne illness?
What was the question? My camera.
Oh, that's fine. If you have to type it in the chat, you can go ahead and type it in there. But what places do you think would be more susceptible to airborne illnesses? Yeah, crowded places, places where a lot of people are hanging out. So, cities, churches, markets, all these different places where people congregate would be brothels, Disneyland. Yes, no, Disney World. Disney World is where you want to avoid. So yeah, so places where people congregate are where people are going to be most susceptible. So even if you're going to church, you're getting sick. And what does that make people think? Irfan, what do you think? If you're still going to church, people are still dying around you, what do you think is going on? Let me unmute you or ask you to unmute.
That it is some sort of God's punishment?
Exactly. God doesn't even want to hear from you. He's so angry at things going on. Liam, do you have something to say?
No, it's the same thing as him.
Okay. Yeah, so God's angry. And why would God be angry? Nathaniel, why would God be angry?
Because he doesn't approve of the way people are living.
That's right. He doesn't approve of the way things are going. Now, if you are a good-hearted Christian, is he, yeah, you committed some sort of heresy. Somebody's committing heresy. Somebody's living in sin. Is it you, Nathaniel?
Potentially.
Is it? Because there are some things that are going to happen to you if it's you.
Yeah.
So, Jacqueline, is it you? Are you? No? Then who is it? It's not us good Christians. Who is it?
Muslims.
What's that?
Muslims, maybe?
Muslims are bad, but they are out there and they're being hit by the Mongols at the point. So who else? Alex. I need you to unmute.
They say they believe because it was the Jews.
There you go. Muslims could be blamed, but number one, they have a big army, getting smaller, but they still have a big army. Number two, they were already being hit by the plague as well. But there is a group within your borders that that is secretive because they have to practice in secret. They are they sort of keep to themselves, and so this this real threat is seen because, you know, If Nathaniel goes and says it was me, then he's going to have to commit penance. You know, Nathaniel would probably be a good person and say, yeah, it was probably me. And so the priest would say, well, go whip yourself 12 times in the morning, 12 times in noon, and 12 times in the evening. And then things still wouldn't get better. And then people would ask, well, is it Jackie then? And she would hide. And so people would continue to pass it off until you got to the people that you already didn't trust, which is people that lived by themselves. And then, of course, Jewish people, because Jewish people either lived in a tentative peace or they completely had to be hidden. And so Northern Jews were seen as the cause of the Black Death, Eastern Jews especially. And you start seeing this notion that Jews are being, are responsible. And so because of that, you see lots of pogroms against them, lots of different new ways to extract revenge against Jews. And this is the beginning, and this happens most often in Central and Eastern Europe, especially in what will become Germany. So keep that in mind as we move forward in this class, that this is the beginning of this idea that Jews are the cause of problems in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe. So here is the path that the plague took. And when I said in the, as I said in the lecture, you know, about up to 60% of the population of Europe died. And this happened from 1346 to 1353. So within 7 years, more than half of the population of this continent dies. The plague is first seen in Asia and the Middle East in 1331, and it spreads through, and word of the plague spreads through before it, but people aren't really as afraid of it because it's not happening to them. This is something that's happening in Asia. This is something that's happening in the Middle East, and then all of a sudden it comes in. There are parallels. In some ways, we haven't gotten any better within the last 650 years. The fact that we knew that this idea comes forward and people still aren't prepared for it. And so the plague spreads through, and all of these arrows that you see here are trade routes moving to big cities. You can see here from Avignon, it goes to Lyon, Chalon, and Besançon. All of those are major cities along trade routes. You know, it goes along the rivers from Naples to Rome. You can just see these major cities connected. You can see where the plague goes because it follows grain, and it follows merchants as they have rats in their care. So it happens very quickly, and it's very, very deadly. And so here is the important part of what happens afterwards. People die off in mass amounts. So what does that do? What does that do to the cities? Yes, Liam.
What was that? Hold on. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I didn't think it unmuted. It makes the famine hit a little less hard because there's less people to feed.
That's right. That's right. Boom. Less people to feed. It did create labor shortages as well in the cities. You need more people to become masons, to become smiths, to become seamstresses, things like that. Yes, Nathaniel. Yeah.
Didn't it also cause wages to go up and more people to get better jobs and create better financial situations for their families?
That's right. And know that this is one of those certain historians. I'm gonna set it up to be able. I'm gonna say this to be able to set up for later. Certain historians are gonna look at this moment in history and see that this is a time when the workers seized the means of production and rose up and actually improved things. They took the situation that they had, labor shortages, less need for unskilled labor in the countryside, and they came together and decided to en masse move to cities. Does that sound sort of familiar to some of the people out there? Just put that idea in your head, the means of production. So that is what happened. But unfortunately, as I said in the note, that quickly the ruling class begins to say, wait, we can't let these people go everywhere. For a long time, the ruling classes, the landed gentry out in the countryside really didn't get along well with the landlords in the cities. They sort of saw themselves as on opposite sides, but these ruling classes sort of begin to come together and they lower the wages. So if you were lucky enough to get out of the countryside, move to a city, not get the plague, and start bettering yourself, you did become a merchant class. And that was one of the things that's important to note also. The people that came into Europe, into these cities after 1350, many of them have survived the plague. They have the antibodies for the plague. So they are healthier, they're stronger, and they have a lot more food to eat. With only 40% of the population, you can afford a lot more. Prices of food go down, so you can afford to eat meat. For a long time, basically up until the 1300s, meat was a luxury. Very few people actually got to eat red meat on a regular basis. You could have chickens, once they were done laying the eggs. You could have chicken every now and then. You could have fish readily available, but red meat was sort of this specialty. So you had people eating more, eating better. Daniel had asked this question: would the play have created a better appreciation for life? And I think it does. I think when you look at the Renaissance, and this, as we're going to get into it, you see that people look at things a lot more in a positive light. You did have so many people that died. You have people that, that suffered. There's all this death. Well, here comes the rebirth. Here comes this new idea of life as it is. This idea that people really are worth something really only comes after you lose a lot of people. It's like people that have a near-death experience, most of them say, oh, I appreciate every single day a lot more. And so that is actually, this is the first time in the 5 years that anyone's asked that question. And I think, oh yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. That if you survived a plague, you would probably think that life was a lot more worth. Yes.
I'm just gonna kind of go out on a limb here, but kind of say, couldn't that question kind of be asked with today, with the whole COVID thing? Now, obviously it's not as deadly as the Black Plague, but I've talked to a lot of people who are more thankful and appreciative of their life because of what's going on right now. So it's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it comes kind of close. I just thought that was kind of interesting because I appreciate a lot of things now more than I did last year even.
Exactly. By raising your hand or emoji, how many people actually miss going out now? Like, I didn't think I would ever really miss being out and in public. I mean, I like going out in public, but it wasn't something that was like, oh, I really need to go out. It was just something like, oh, well, I got nothing to do. I guess I'll go out. But now, after, you know, the past few months in quarantine, you know, even the thought of being able to be out in a crowd with people 6 months ago would have been like, whatever. But now it's like, oh, yeah, I do miss going to work every day, as weird as that sounds. This office, or excuse me, this 14th century theater that I find myself in, has been my home for the past few months. And so this is, you know, everybody miss doing things. And so, yeah, I think you can, even though it's not like, oh my God, 6 of my family members died last week, I was the only one that survived. You know, there is still an appreciation. So yeah, I think that is a really good note. You know, yeah, seeing people, seeing more than a face makes me happy. You know, all these different, you know, all these different things are really, really important. And even when you know, you see, even though there are these strict policies, yeah, some people refuse to follow them. You know, it's this idea that, you know, gosh, if this was a deadlier thing, you know, we'd be in real trouble right now. Luckily, it is not a deadly thing, and I think that, you know, we should count our lucky stars that it's not as deadly as it could be, but also it's, you know, those of us that have been trying to you know, do the right thing, to sort of stay in and do these things, you know, we're gonna love it a lot more whenever we go out. You know, whenever we finally go out, you're just gonna, you know, appreciate it a lot more. That first time you're back at church, the first time you have a draft beer, you're gonna enjoy it a lot more. You know, things are gonna change. You know, the first time that, you know, there was the optimism that we might in October be in class together. I don't think that that's actually going to happen. But then the first time that you're in a crowded classroom, you're just gonna like it that much more. So thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. I think that really is a good thing to note. Something that the reason I don't think anyone's ever asked that is because we've never been in a situation where we do have to actually think of the things that we've missed, the things that we missed, the things that we've lost for. So any questions about the Middle Ages before we move forward? All right, so with all of this death, with all of this change, must come a rebirth, or you hope that a rebirth comes. And so it is the Italian city-states that rise up. And this is what contributes to the rise of the Italian city-states: money, opportunity, and of course, water. Money, opportunity, and water. So money. Well, this is probably not a well-known item, but why do the Italian city-states have so much money in the 13th century, or 13th and 14th century? Anybody want to take a wild guess? What were those big religious wars that we briefly touched on a little bit ago?
Crusades.
The Crusades. And in order to get to the Holy Land, you had to go through the Mediterranean and the city-states of Genoa, Venice, Naples are right on there. And so all of the Crusaders would either have to go the long way around, or they would get some boats in one of these city-states. So that's why they had money. They had, there were all of these wars that went through, and people needed goods, people needed ships. The Genoans and the Venetians in particular were really good at building ships, and so they would buy them. You also had the fact that after that the plague didn't hit the Italian states as hard. Now, once again, why would the plague not hit them as hard? Especially up here in Genoa and Venice. Yes, Liam.
Is it because the kind of area of Italy is kind of mountainous or hilly, so that not a lot of people actually kind of are all in one area?
If you call the Alps hilly and mountainous, then yes. Over here you have the Swiss Alps that come down, and the end of it is above here. So yeah, so people couldn't really come this way. As I hit my microphone, sorry. So most of the trading that went by ship, you did have plague through that. And so Genoa and Venice and Naples do get hit somewhat. This little city here in the middle of Florence sort of avoids a lot of that. So that's money. Opportunity. Well, opportunity comes because there's no more reason to fight. You know, you have the peace after the Crusades, and so there is an agreement between the Islamic Caliphate and the kingdoms of Europe to keep the Holy Land protected and to open up trade. Boom, you get the opportunity for trade. So money, opportunity go hand in hand, and then of course the water. Water. They have all this access to not only the Mediterranean, but they also have access to the Atlantic. And if you look at the trade routes that are opened up after, during the Renaissance, they line up almost perfectly with the way that the plague came through. So the trade routes that caused the plague to spread so quickly later on are going to help Europe recover very quickly as well. So these trade routes that have been there since the time of Rome, they giveth and they taketh away, basically, because they helped spread the plague, but then they also help in this recovery. Those trade routes are still good, and if you see a dead body, stay away from it, cover your mouth, and then keep pushing on forward, moving through the cities. So really from 1350 to 1500 at the peak of the plague, and then by the time you see the peak of the Renaissance, you have all these trade routes open back up. Cities are beginning to fill back up, and as I said in the lecture, basically by 1500 you are back to where you started in 1300 as far as population goes, but as far as wealth and as far as ability, you basically hit a reset button in Europe. Europe got to hit the reset button. Meanwhile, as we'll look at in the next couple of weeks, the rest of the world is still going through ebbs and flows of history, while Europe basically had to sacrifice 60% of their population, but they got to recover very, very relatively quickly from that. mean, from losing half your population to becoming a world power within a century and a half is a wondrous feat. And one of the questions that we will be looking at later is why this happens so quickly. So, any questions about the Italian city-states and how what role they played in the rise of the Renaissance? So then let me throw in, break time will be in about 5 minutes. Just want to get through this last question before we go in and take a break. So in your estimation, we will look at, I'll ask you this. What is the Renaissance's greatest treasure? Each of you. I will ask you this. You know what? Actually, this is a good question to take into break. And then I'll come back and I'll ask you guys individually, have you guys look at this. So in your break, as you stretch around, think of what you personally think is the greatest treasure that the Renaissance has given humanity up here into the 21st century. That sound good? All right, then we will come back at let's give it a couple extra minutes. So by 7:55, be back here, and we will look at this and discuss this. Okay. Then I will go ahead and pause record. The main point of the Renaissance there is to of Renaissance art is really to push the envelope. The main point of Renaissance art is to sort of poke fun at the powers that be, is to sort of give a message underneath, is to sort of play with light, play with the canvas, the material, and at the same time tell a story. So you start seeing the beginnings of what will become a much more politicized and much more a much more subversive form of art. So that is Renaissance art. Now, when it comes to Renaissance literature, it really changes in the fact that it once again becomes much more political. Just like art, there are writings about politics. There are writings about how to be a good politician. Writings from people such as Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli is an Italian philosopher who writes about how a ruler should rule. He begins to look at realpolitik, and we'll talk more about realpolitik later. But realpolitik is basically, well, you have your ideals, you have your scruples, but in the real world, those don't matter. You have to be able to rule above and outside of your morality sometimes. So he begins to write that big political writing begins to become more important. You also have history and cultural anthropology being created. This is Bartolomé de las Casas, who we'll talk about more later on. And de las Casas was one of the friars that sailed with Hernán Cortés and was there during the conquest of the Aztecs. And he is known as the savior of indigenous ideas, because everyone was burning writings and statues and art of the Aztecs, but Bartolome was trying to save them. You know, he wrote down everything that he could and tried to save as much as he could in order to rescue some of the works and save some of the history. And what little history we have is this this is because of him. And then in the Northern Renaissance, we have of course, William Shakespeare, who basically gave us the most of most of what we know of as English. English was seen as an ugly language. English was seen as as sort of a dirty thing, and Shakespeare actually made it into a language that was worthwhile. All of the writers, major writers around his time, were either writing in German or in French, especially. French was seen as the highest of high languages. Latin was seen as the most important because it was the closest to the church, and English was sort of seen as not really worth it. But Shakespeare really makes it worth it, and many of the idioms that we still use to this day come from his writings. He created so many different sayings that we take for granted to this day. And what I can do is I'll go ahead and send a link out to you guys. There's like pages on the internet that show all of the different sayings that were created by William Shakespeare. And most importantly for this Renaissance is the idea of humanism. When we were coming back from the break, one of the, I believe it was Elijah who said that that the greatest gift was this idea of bettering humanity, and that really is what humanism is about. Humanism is about seeing that humans have self-worth, that humans are actually made in the image of God, and so they can actually make themselves better. We're not just stuck in this primal state of nature. We're not just stuck in this in our current state. We can improve ourselves. We can improve ourselves from within. So if we can improve ourselves from within, what does that say about the foundational forces outside of us? What does that say about the church, about society? Do we need these things? People start asking these questions. And it is this idea of humanism that becomes very dangerous. And this is why the church, as I spoke of in the lecture, this is why the church really begins to push their own ideas into the Renaissance humanism. Yes, you can improve yourself, but you need to do it through the proper channels. They try to temper a lot of these ideas, and these ideas are going to spread through thanks to technology, thanks to the Gutenberg Press. A lot of people said that technology and the Gutenberg Press were the important things, and ideas such as humanism push forward. So these are the big ideas of the Renaissance. The only thing that we really, I think most people don't think about, one of the things that we really haven't looked at is, what about the women? What about what's going on in the Renaissance? You have all of these different there's this money flowing in, trade of ideas, new philosophies, new art. Must be the perfect time for women to move forward, right? Right? You can see by everybody's faces that no, this is not time for the women. Women are still kept in roles as labor, as manual labor, especially when there's after the Black Death. Everyone needs to pitch in, and so women sort of are given the manual labor and they stay with the manual labor. Women are seen as objects. In many paintings, you can see that women are sort of the objects of lust for men. That women have the roles that women have are to be lusted after until they become mothers, and then they no longer have that beauty within them, and then they have to basically become the keeper of the home. Now there are exceptions to this. There are great exceptions to this, but basically the only exceptions are those of high-born women. Someone like Lucrezia Borgia. If anyone has seen the TV show Borgia or read about the Borgias, you know that Lucretia is one of the women that breaks free from the bounds that she is put forward, and she is someone that sort of rebels against the strictness of society. She is daughter of a pope. One of the Borgias are one of the strongest and most important family in the Renaissance. They are of the Aragon, of the crown of Aragon, which will become important later on. And then there are some women that people don't really talk about, like this is Christine de Pizan. She was a French writer and proto-feminist that was writing in the 1300s about independence for women and how women had this sort of self-worth. She was able to read and write because she was sent to a monastery, and that was really the only way that women could really move outside of their station, or move outside of this notion that you needed to be married, have kids, move your family into a better place, is by saying, well, I'm just not going to have kids. I'm just not going to get married. And instead she put herself to write. And it's very, very important to note that some of the early feminists are coming from France. That's going to become, just like some of this stuff, I'm laying this down for later on. And even so you could move up in politics, you could move up in literature, and even this background here that I have is actually painted by a woman in 1532. She's a highborn woman, Sofonista Argusiela, and she was a court artist in Spain, that she would paint these beautiful paintings of women, of girls, just to make sure that they had some sort of memory of them. So basically, women in the Renaissance, even though you have this great fortune being changed, unfortunately that doesn't really translate to women as much as it does to men. Any questions here before we move on? All right. So I will stop that, close this out, and pull up the last one, the Reformation. So, here we go. So, just like I asked about the Renaissance, what do you know about the Reformation? More people know about the Renaissance than they do the Reformation.
Martin Luther.
That's right. Martin Luther. Martin Luther started the Reformation. Martin Luther was a German priest that decided he had had enough with some of the issues with the church, and decided that he was going to change things. Anyone else have anything that they know about the Reformation? Yes, Liam.
I know it led to different branches of Christianity based off of the Martin Luther, like 52 or 107 reasons why the church sucks or something.
Yes. 95 reasons why. Yes. as Isabel said, there was a new form of Christianity created, which we'll get into in a sec. And Liam noted that as well. And then Trinity talked about John Calvin and Calvinism. And Calvinism is something that we really are going to focus on here, because it really is going to play into colonialism later on. So basically the Reformation is this change in the way that people view the church. With the Renaissance, with this new upheaval in society, with this new focus on humanity, comes a re-examination of Christendom, of Catholicism. You know, humanity can improve humanity, and what do we need the church for? You know, why do we have the church? You know, we were talking about at the beginning of class about some of the misconceptions or some of the things that you know about the Dark Ages, and one of them was that the church controlled most facets of life. They were very overbearing. So what does that mean if you don't need the church? What does that do? And so people begin to ask this question, and this goes hand in hand with the Renaissance. Because with the Renaissance comes more money, comes people moving into the cities. And if you have all of these people gathering together, vastly outnumbering the clergy, there's really a lot less rules. These folk superstitions mix in with Christianity. These folk traditions mix with Christianity. This is actually a painting of a Christmas celebration. This is what people would do in Christmas, is they would just get together, drink mulled wine, have a great time, and just basically party for hours and hours on end. Part of the reasons why you have things like caroling is because people would get drunk and they would just run around the streets singing. And they would go to house, drunkenly sing and say, give us some food, or give us something, or we'll keep singing at you. So these new ideas in the cities begin to go against a lot of what the church says. And then the Gutenberg press and technology allows for people to print the Bible in their own language. And so this really changes the way that society looks at the world, because you can start to read now. You can read in your own language. You don't have to know Latin in order to just be able to read. And so now you can read in German, French, English, whatever you want. You can actually start learning how to read. And more people begin to read. And you start seeing society change from the bottom. And then also you have society change from the top. You have these new rulers that come in, and these new rulers begin to look at the way that kingdoms have operated, and they begin to change it. You have people like, starting from the right, this is Henry VII, the first of the York kings, won the War of the Roses. War of the Roses that was later copied by George R.R. Martin into the, he was a Lancaster king. This is the Lannisters one. He was, George R.R. Martin basically copied the War of the Roses to create the Lannisters and Starks. You have, this is Louis XI, who his father, Henri VII, basically united all of the feuding forces of France, but died before you could really consolidate power. And then Louis takes over and does that, and consolidates power up top. You have down here at the bottom, John I of Portugal, who also consolidated power and began to make as Brian said, Portugal this great begin the steps to make Portugal this great seafaring power. And then finally, you have Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, who will become very, very important in a couple of weeks. Does anybody have any questions about the new monarchs before I get into this question to you guys? Feudalism. Medieval politics. Who's in charge? Who rules?
God.
God rules everybody. God rules the universe. What about on the earth? Who rules us on the earth?
The wealthy.
The wealthy. Boom. Feudalism is a pyramid. The king, noble landlords, king chosen by God. Yeah. So you can see you have the farmers and the peasants at the very bottom, and they offer food and services to the knights, and the knights and the vassals offer protection to the people. Nobility is offered loyalty, military service by the knights, and they give land to knights. And the king basically takes taxes and knights from the nobility and gives them land. Well, if the nobility already has land, then why is this king there? Who needs this king? And so the nobility begin to think, or there's this idea towards late feudalism that maybe you don't need a king. Maybe you don't need someone in charge. And in England, you actually have the nobility take the king hostage and tell him that, yes, you're equal. King John is kidnapped and has to sign the Magna Carta, is forced to sign the Magna Carta. And so you start getting this idea that you don't need a monarch. And so what happens is those new monarchs that I just talked about, they begin to consolidate power and put nobility in that they need for themselves. And so they change power. They get rid of nobles that are against them and start filling nobility with their kids and their extended family. And you start seeing a nobility that is much more friendly to the monarch. And so the monarch begins to have much more absolute power. So the monarch gets more absolute power over the nobility and knights and vassals, but that begins to break down the system. You don't need the system as much, but there is someone above the monarch that loves this system, that this works great for them. Who could possibly be above a monarch? Who on earth could be? Daniel?
The church.
That's right. The Pope and the church. The Pope is expected for kings to give them money and taxes, and knights if they want to do a crusade. The monarchs are expected to give them. Well, with these new ideas of not needing the church, well, you can eliminate that middleman there, and all of a sudden you have just the king in charge with no more pope. And this is exactly what happens. The monarchs get this idea that you don't need the king. There is the rise of state power. Here is a painting of Henri VII of France. And can anybody guess, here's Henri VII, what historical event he's put himself in? Henri has written some historical fiction here. Anybody know what this is? I'll give you a hint. Here's a manger. And here's a star. Yes, Liam.
It's the birth of Christ.
This is the nativity. This is the nativity scene. Okay, here is Henri the Seventh, and he is actually giving Jesus communion. Who is in the middle of this painting? Is it Jesus? It is not Jesus. Henri has put himself in the middle, literally in the middle of the nativity. He's saying that Jesus himself would look up to Henri. And what's behind Henri there? What do you see here? An army. That's right. He has brought an entire army to the nativity. In the back, you see people sieging the Holy Land, conquering the Holy Land, and in the front is Henri at the birth of Jesus. So this is what state power looks like. This is what absolute power looks like, where you can just have, you could basically say, Jesus would want me at his birth. Look, Henri isn't even kneeling on the dirt. He has a pillow and a rug around it. So he's not even touching the ground. This is some subversive art here, where he's putting himself into a position of power, if not near, if not equal to God, then above God. So this is what these new monarchs are doing. They are putting themselves above the power of the church. So the rise of the new monarchs, the consolidation of state power mixed with corruption of the church. This is what leads to the Martin Luther being so angry that he splits from the church. There is the veneration of relics, the persecution of anyone that talks back to the church, being branded a heretic. And then there are indulgences. So all of these ideas, plus these things that Martin Luther doesn't agree with, is what's going to lead to this reform, or to this attempt at reform. And Reformation means reform. He wasn't trying to split off from the church to begin with. He was trying to fix the church. Martin Luther wanted to fix the church. And quickly he figured out that wasn't going to happen. And that's when it moved into protest. That's when Reformation becomes the beginning of Protestantism. You can't have Reformation without reform. You can't have Protestantism without protest. So these different words have great meaning behind them. And so this is the splitting of Western Christianity. This is the third schism of Christianity, and it is the final schism so far of Christianity, the final great schism of Christianity. Any questions before we move forward? So Martin Luther, German professor. As I said, you got to watch out for those professors. They put all sorts of ideas in your head. Martin Luther, he writes his 95 Theses against the church. And these theses are basically these if-then type of statements. So they are debate points. So basically he says, if God is the omnipotent force, then, why do we need, he can't be known, then why does the church saying that they are the one that can know God? Things like that. He's saying that he has his big beefs are with the sacraments, with the veneration of idols, and then finally it is with indulgences. And as I said in the lecture, Martin Luther is not a radical populist. He's not talking about, oh, the poor can't get into heaven, this is unfair to the poor. Martin Luther actually turns against a populist uprising There are peasants that rise up against the church and say that, we need to get rid of all of these formal religions, and Martin Luther says no, and Martin Luther actually doesn't stand up to them as they are slaughtered by noblemen and knights because they tried to rise up against the new church authority. So he's not a populist. He is 100% theological based. There's nothing really in his ideas that say that you need to split into a new church. All of these things are ideas that can be fixed, but instead the church tries to have him arrested, excommunicates him, and this is when really this new idea pushes forward. This is when Lutheranism begins to take shape. Is after 1521 when Martin Luther is excommunicated, when he's on the run. After that, you start seeing this breakdown of the Holy Roman Empire. You start seeing, here is where Wittenberg is, outside of Berlin, in the north of Germany. This is in 1517 is when the Holy Roman Empire really breaks down, and when really you start seeing the rise of these new religions. So by the 1600s, within a century, this is the religious makeup of the Holy Roman Empire. What was once 100% Catholic is now partially Lutheran and partially Calvinist. But the southernmost parts, other than the Swiss Confederation, stays Catholic. Now, why would they stay Catholic? What exactly is it about the southern part of Germany that would make it much more valuable to stay Catholic? Can anybody hazard a guess? Has anybody been to Germany? Anybody visited Germany? One day I'd like to, but they're not letting Americans in right now. Yes, Armin. So what is it about southern Germany that makes it stay Catholic? You kind of see there's a little something down here. Something. It is closer. Number one, it is closer to Rome. Yep. Roman culture and Catholicism is very strong. Thanks, Daniel. It is very, very strong here. Also, it's a lot more resource rich, and so the church puts a lot more resources into, or a lot more money into southern Germany. Northern Germany, however, is a lot more wooded, a lot more sparsely populated, a lot poorer, and so the people there are when they pay into the church, they're actually paying a lot more of their value. So all of these different reasons get them to move out. Number one, the proximity to Rome is greater in the south. The money is greater in the south, and the hardship is greater in the north. So, and of course, the distance away from the north. So that's why you have Lutheranism take hold. Now, as far as Calvinism takes hold in there because of the strong ideals of John Calvin and this sort of fervor into living simply of the unknowableness of God. This passion of religion takes hold in the Swiss Confederation and in the Palatinate because they just feel that old-time religion a lot more than even the northern Germans. So technology spreads quickly. in Germany, Germans are always known for their manufacturing and their efficientness, and with the Bible and with the teachings of other Lutheran priests, you start seeing these ideas really move quickly through Germany. And from Germany, they move quickly into Denmark. And from there, they move into England. And pretty soon you have this great fervor into reforming the church, into following Martin Luther. And after Martin Luther begins to split away from the church, that's when you start really seeing the writings increase. That's when you start seeing people calling for new churches. That's when you start seeing new ideas move faster and faster. That's when you start seeing the change in society happen much more quickly. You had a very egalitarian northern Germany under the Catholic Church, but then quickly in northern Germany, they begin to move into this idea of the father being the head of household, the father being in charge of souls, father being in charge of creating money and wealth, and the mother's main job being that of a housekeeper, of a teacher, raising the children. So this rugged, to use a 20th century term, this rugged individualism of women in northern Germany, where they were treated just as equally as men for centuries, begins to move away as men become much more important. As this idea of men as the keeper of souls and the provider of wealth and the provider of food for their family, then it is the woman's job to take care of the children, to clean the house, to cook, to do all of the subservient things. This is where anyone who is theologically aware or theologically proficient, where the idea of women submit to your husband really takes on a much more prominent role in society. This idea that women are in a separate sphere from men, that they shouldn't be out working the fields or working in the cities. So this has women as the church splits in two, and then splits even more. It would be fair for you to think that women are going to be in a much better place in society, but in actuality, women begin to take a step backwards in Protestant nations as they begin to be seen as more of a nurturer than actually a provider. Any questions? So we'll do a couple more of these real quick. I wanted to get to the next one, the next slide especially, and then we can discuss. Then we can break for the evening. So from reform, it leads to protest. And what happens in this regard is that, number one, the church pushes back harshly. The church excommunicates anyone that disagrees with them. The church buckles down and doubles down on their viewpoints, not really taking any criticism well. Why should the church take criticism at all? They've been, they are the only way to get to heaven. So the church response really pushes people away. You also have theological ideas, theological changes that appeal to the people. Things like Calvinism, which basically gives this idea of predestination, that we don't even know if we're going to heaven or not. The only person that knows that is God. And there's no way that we can change that. So like I said in the lecture, most people would think that this would lead to hedonism. Like, well, who cares? You know, this world is this world is garbage anyway, and when we die, we don't even know what we need to do. So, you know, who cares? But another part that John Calvin teaches is that part of God's grace is the world. Part of God's ideas is society. And so with that teaching, basically he says to people, if you want God to not give another plague, if you want God to shine down on humanity, you have to continue to improve nature, improve the world, improve society. So it's sort of this, well, yeah, you can go do whatever you want, but you guys remember that plague that happened? Would you like that to happen again? And so it is this idea that God will shine down as long as humans improve the world, as long as humans improve society. That really hits into Calvinism, and that really makes it so that Calvinists will be willing to work sunrise to sunset, that Calvinists will be willing to live modestly and give any of their money to their children to make sure that their children have a better life, that Calvinists will work without the promise of an eternal reward, but still keep their heads down and work hard. And that really resonates with them. And that's why Calvinism spreads. That and Calvinism is a very strongly conservative form of religion, because basically, you know, you're not supposed to ask questions. You're not supposed to act out. Follow what God says, make the world better, and live simply. And they really take that to the extremes, as we'll talk about in a few weeks when we come back to Calvinists in their influence in world affairs. And then, of course, the biggest reason for Protestantism when it comes to England is political ambitions. Politics is never far away from religion, especially during this time period. Someone like King Henry VIII is going to want to have more freedom than the church is willing to give them. And we talked about these new monarchs, strong rulers that have gotten rid or have a better understanding of their nobility. And Henry VIII was one of those. And the last thing we'll talk about this evening, I'll go ahead and go over a deep dive into Henry VIII and his many wives. The story of Henry VIII begins, fittingly enough, with his father, Henry VII. Henry VII consolidated Lancaster power, defeated his enemies, and came out on top of the War of the Roses and took over as King of England. Henry VII had, 7 kids, and 4 of them survived into adolescence. His oldest, Prince Arthur, was in line for the throne. So England could have had an actual King Arthur at one point. Prince Arthur is actually the older brother of Prince Henry. So Arthur is the heir apparent. And in trying to consolidate power, Henry VII finds a very, very suitable bride for him. He finds Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon is a descendant of the Borgia family. Very well bred family, very wealthy family, very important family from way, way back, but then also very important because Catherine of Aragon is the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel. So with this marriage, blessed by the Pope, Henry will ensure that the next King of England will also be in line for the kingship of Spain. So Spain will be under control of England, and the Pope is okay with that because he will have two of the greatest armies in the world under his control. This is happening about the same time as you're starting to get rumblings of the Reformation. This betrothal happens in about 1509, and about 1517, you have Arthur and Catherine marrying, except Arthur dies within months of their marriage. Arthur is, I believe, 15 or 16, and his bride is a couple years younger than him. And so Henry is distraught. Henry is, he's trying to salvage things, and Henry dies as well. And so Henry VIII comes to the throne, and with the help of the Pope and the Spanish crown, he actually gets Catherine to state under oath that she never consummated her marriage with Arthur. And so Catherine is then betrothed to Henry VIII. And so Henry VIII will become, is the now heir apparent to the Spanish crown, or at least their child will be the heir apparent to the Spanish crown. And so with the death of Henry VII, you have the ascension of Henry VIII, and Catherine of Aragon becomes Queen Catherine in England. And so they go, and Henry VIII needs a male heir. And Catherine gives birth to a male heir, William, who dies within weeks of birth. And she mourns for him. Henry mourns, and they keep trying for more children, and only one they will only have one more child, who will be Mary, Queen Mary, or future Queen Mary. Mary will be raised as Catholic, and she will be taken away from her family, but there will be no male heir. There will be no male heir, and then Henry will begin to have wandering eyes, and he will meet Anne Boleyn, and he will ask the Pope to allow him to divorce. He will say that Catherine actually did consummate her marriage with Arthur, that she has broken the vows, that this marriage should be annulled because it was never valid in the first place. The Pope says no. And so Henry VIII decides to break away from the church and marry Anne Boleyn. He actually has Catherine locked up and executed for infidelity and treason. And so Anne Boleyn becomes the Queen of England, and they begin to try to have children. They don't have a male heir, but they have a young daughter named Elizabeth. And Elizabeth will be taken away to live away from her family as Henry gets bored with Anne Boleyn and meets Jane Seymour and begins an affair with her, and has Anne Boleyn executed, and marries Jane Seymour, making her Queen Jane. Queen Jane has 3 miscarriages, but finally gives birth to a male heir, Edward VI. But in this childbirth, Queen Jane will die. And so Henry will be left. He will have to marry for politics, and he will marry 3 more times, Anne and 2 more Catherines. Catherine Parr being his last queen. And as he dies, or as she, at the end of Henry's life, he does have a male heir, but his most important child is this. It is the oath of the Act of Supremacy in 1534, breaking away from the Catholic Church, declaring that the King of England is the rightful ruler of people's lives and people's souls. So Henry VIII makes it so that that the King of England from here, that from here on out will be the head of the Church of England. There is no Church of England. He just says this. He does this all sort of by the seat of his pants because he wants to get away, because he wants to have a male child. And all this does is create trouble between England and the rest of the continent, between the French and between the Spanish. And so you have increasing battles that are going to go past, Henry VIII's life that we'll get into later on. But basically, what you're going to be seeing, as we'll touch on this a little bit next week, is by the 1600s, Europe is completely changed. With Henry breaking away from the church, with the rise of Lutheranism, with the rise of Calvinism, later Methodism, all these different subsects of Protestantism, you have a Europe that is completely changed, a Europe that is full of religious fervor. You know, if you have all of these different churches breaking free, you know, we talked about how great how great the learning and the idea of humanity was in the Renaissance. We'll just start adding religion to that. So this great fervor of humanity takes on this great fervor of religion as well. And so you see people wanting to push God forward. And all of a sudden it becomes, well, what God are we putting forward? The Protestant God or the Catholic God? What is going to be getting out there? And so because of this, Europe has the notion to begin to move out. But there are other countries out there that are standing in the way of Europe moving out. And so next week we will look at these countries and see why they weren't able to stop Europe from expanding out. We'll talk a little. We'll come back to this a little bit more and look at the religious wars in Europe, but mostly we will look at the rise and fall of the Islamic empires in between Europe and and Asia, East Asia, and we will look at what exactly it is that keeps the Middle East from benefiting from exploration, from being able to push out. That will be our focus for next week, the 3 gunpowder empires. Does anyone have any questions? So your assignments will open up later tonight. Your next discussion question will also open up, and I will work on editing the next lecture. I'll try to get it up again Sunday night. As best I can. The editing is always the worst part of these videos. But if you haven't looked over the first lecture, please do so. The name of the second Queen of England was Anne Boleyn. So yeah, look over your lecture. It's in chunks because it was long. But I hope that this sort of more open discussion and more dialogue between us versus just sitting here listening to me for the entire 3 hours was beneficial to you guys, and you guys learned a lot more. Let me know how you guys are liking the class. Keep talking to me. Let me know if there's things that you want me to focus on as well, and I will do that for you. So I don't think I have anything else, since it's right at 9 o'clock and it's right towards the end. It's been a long evening, so I will go ahead and stop the recording right here.